He didn't move. The dress clung tighter. The lights revealed everything. 6 months of hiding, shattered in one rainstorm. She'd been told she was infertile, irreversible, impossible. He divorced her 2 weeks after the diagnosis, needed an heir for his empire, couldn't waste time on broken goods. She never knew it was a lie. Never knew his enemies paid $250,000 to destroy their marriage. Never knew the doctor fabricated everything. Never knew she could have children after all. Until 2 weeks after the divorce, when she started feeling sick. Now she stood on stage, 6 months pregnant, watching her ex-husband's face drain of color as the rain-dampened dress revealed the impossible truth. The Mafia boss who'd walked away stood 15 feet from the stage, frozen, staring at the baby bump that shouldn't exist. His child, growing inside the wife he'd thrown away. What happened next changed everything. But what he discovered next changed everything. Let me take you back to where this all started. They paid a doctor $250,000 to destroy my marriage. The Alston family, my ex-husband's enemies, bribed Dr. Leonard Royce to lie about my medical test results. To tell me I had irreversible ovarian failure. To make me believe I'd never have children. My husband, Jackson Mallory, filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Couldn't build his Mafia empire without an heir, he said through his attorney. Clean break. No fighting for us. Just papers served on our second wedding anniversary. That was 6 months ago. Tonight, I'm standing on stage at the Sterling Development Charity Gala in Manhattan, unveiling the waterfront design that saved my architecture firm after the divorce. I'm wearing a crimson wrap dress with empire waist tailoring designed to hide one critical secret. I'm 6 months pregnant with Jackson's child. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I checked the guest list twice. But men like Jackson Mallory don't follow guest lists. They go where they please, and the world rearranges itself to accommodate them. And right now, he's standing near the bar, surrounded by security, those dark predator eyes scanning the ballroom with the vigilance that comes from running an empire where weakness gets you killed. If you've ever been told you're broken, not enough, or had someone walk away when things got hard, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and comment where you're watching from. We're building a family of people who refuse to be discarded. Then our eyes meet across the crowded space, and I watch recognition flare in his expression. 6 months of silence. 6 months of rebuilding my life. All of it compressed into the space between his gaze and mine. That's when someone opens the ballroom doors. The rainstorm I'd been dreading arrives with humid force, flooding the space with dampness. Within minutes, my carefully structured dress begins responding to the moisture, the fabric relaxing from its strategic tension, the empire waist that concealed my bump beginning to cling instead. I feel it happening, the betrayal of physics and humidity working against 6 months of desperate concealment. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. The stage lights are positioned to eliminate shadows, to provide optimal visibility for architectural presentations. Professional lighting designed to reveal fine details. To reveal exactly what someone doesn't want revealed. I watched Jackson's expression change. Watched the polite interest he'd been wearing, the mask of a guest attending a charity event, crack and then shatter entirely. His face went completely blank. That terrifying emptiness that meant his mind was processing something that didn't compute, recalibrating reality to accommodate new, impossible information. That moment, everything in the room changed. His gaze dropped from my face to my midsection, fixed there with laser focus on the curve that 6 months of careful concealment had hidden, that strategic tailoring had disguised, that was now unmistakably, undeniably visible in the unforgiving stage lights and rain-dampened fabric. The tumbler in his hand stopped halfway to his lips, froze there, as if someone had hit pause on his entire existence. I'd seen Jackson surprised exactly twice in the 3 years I'd known him. Once when his father had died, The heart attack that no one had predicted taking Vincent Mallory in the middle of a board meeting. And once, when the doctor had delivered my infertility diagnosis, the words irreversible ovarian failure hitting him like bullets to the chest. This was that same expression, that same terrible blankness that meant Jackson Mallory, man who controlled half of Manhattan's underground economy, who'd survived 3 assassination attempts before his 30th birthday, who'd built an empire on never being caught off guard, had just had his entire world upended. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Our eyes met again across the ballroom, and this time there was no polite recognition, no civilized pretense, just the dawning realization that the wife he'd divorced for being infertile was 6 months pregnant, and the absolute certainty that he was going to demand answers I wasn't prepared to give. I made it through exactly 4 more slides before everything fell apart. The presentation was going well. Polite applause at the sustainability statistics. Appreciative murmurs when I revealed the rooftop garden concept that would provide green space in a neighborhood starved for it. I'd found my rhythm despite Jackson's presence. That muscle memory of public speaking carrying me through even as my heart hammered against my ribs. The building's orientation maximizes natural light while minimizing heat gain, I explained, gesturing to the cross-section rendering. Each unit features floor-to-ceiling windows with smart glass technology that adjusts tinting based on... Another gust of wind swept through the ballroom, stronger this time. The storm had arrived in earnest, rain now pounding against the windows with enough force to create a steady percussion beneath my words. Someone finally closed the doors, but the damage was done. Humidity had flooded the space, turning the air thick and damp. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. I felt it immediately, the way my dress responded to the moisture. The carefully structured fabric that had maintained its shape for the past hour suddenly relaxing, beginning to cling. The empire waist that had draped strategically over my bump now molding to it instead, accentuating rather than concealing. My hand moved instinctively to adjust the material, but stopping mid-gesture would draw more attention than the movement itself. I forced myself to continue, to push through the mounting panic. The smart glass reduces cooling costs by 30%. My voice remained steady even as I felt the fabric betraying me with every breath, every slight movement. The stage lights that had seemed merely bright before now felt like interrogation lamps, eliminating every shadow, revealing every curve. I risked a glance at Jackson. He'd moved closer to the stage, I realized with a jolt of fear. No longer at the bar but standing near the front row, his security detail flanking him like dark sentinels. His tumbler sat abandoned on a nearby table, forgotten. His complete focus had narrowed to me with that predator's intensity I remembered too well. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. His gaze tracked my every movement, the way I shifted my weight to ease the pressure on my lower back, the protective gesture I couldn't quite suppress when the baby kicked, the telltale curve that 6 months of pregnancy had created despite my best efforts to hide it. I watched the exact moment realization hit. His eyes had been moving over me with clinical assessment, that calculating focus he applied to everything, searching for whatever had changed, whatever felt different about the woman he'd been married to for 2 years. Then his gaze fixed on my midsection and simply stopped. The rest of him stopped too. His breathing, his expression, the constant vigilance that kept him scanning rooms for threats. Everything froze as his mind processed what his eyes were seeing, as impossible recognition crystallized into undeniable fact. Jackson's face went completely blank. And then, the gun clicked. Not angry, not confused, just empty in that terrifying way that meant his entire internal system had crashed and was rebooting around information that shouldn't exist, that violated every fact he thought he knew. I'd seen that expression exactly once before. 3 years ago, in Dr. Royce's office, when the doctor had delivered the diagnosis with clinical detachment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mallory. But the test results are definitive. Irreversible ovarian failure. You won't be able to conceive naturally, and given the severity of the condition, even IVF has less than a 1% success rate. Jackson had gone completely still. That same terrible blankness washing over his features as the words destroyed the future he'd been planning. The heir he needed, the legacy he'd been raised to perpetuate, the biological imperative that ran through Mallory family history like DNA. That expression had haunted me through 6 months of his growing distance, through the divorce papers that had cited irreconcilable differences, but meant, you can't give me what I need, through the careful rebuilding of a life that didn't include him. And now he wore it again, standing 15 feet from the stage where his ex-wife, the woman whose infertility had ended their marriage, was visibly, undeniably, 6 months pregnant. There was one detail everyone missed. The portfolio rendering on screen behind me continued cycling through images on its automatic timer, but I'd lost my place in the presentation entirely. My mouth had gone dry. My hands trembled against the podium's edge. Jackson's security detail had noticed his reaction, I realized distantly. They'd gone on alert, hands moving subtly toward concealed weapons, eyes scanning for whatever threat had triggered their boss's response. But the threat wasn't external. The threat was me, and the impossible truth my body had just revealed. His eyes met mine across the distance separating us, and I saw the question forming, the demand for explanation that would come whether I wanted to give it or not. Because Jackson Mallory didn't accept mysteries, didn't tolerate unanswered questions, and absolutely didn't walk away from something that belonged to him. In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. And if that child was his, if the timeline matched, if the impossible had happened, then in his world, in the empire he'd built on control and possession and absolute authority, I'd just become his again whether I liked it or not. I didn't remember finishing the presentation. Muscle memory must have carried me through the final slides, delivered the closing remarks, smiled for the polite applause. But my conscious mind had already fled, was already calculating escape routes and survival strategies. The moment the event coordinator dismissed me, I moved. Not toward the ballroom floor where Byron waited with potential clients and networking opportunities, but toward the backstage exit that led to the service corridors. My heels clicked against polished wood as I grabbed my abandoned clutch and pushed through the heavy curtain. The corridor beyond was blessedly empty. Just industrial carpet and fluorescent lighting, and the blessed absence of hundreds of eyes. I'd made it maybe 20 feet when I heard the door behind me open and close with decisive finality. Harper. He realized he wasn't alone. Someone else had arrived. His voice stopped me mid-stride. Not loud, not angry, just my name spoken with absolute authority. The tone that meant refusal wasn't an option. That meant he'd already calculated every possible response and prepared counters for each. I forced myself to turn slowly, to meet his gaze with something approximating composure, even though my heart was trying to break through my ribcage. Jackson stood blocking the corridor, his security detail conspicuously absent. He'd sent them away, I realized. Whatever conversation was about to happen, he wanted no witnesses. "You need to let me pass," I said, proud of how steady my voice emerged. "I have clients waiting." "Don't." He moved closer, each step measured and controlled. "Don't insult both of us by pretending you're going back to that ballroom." From here on, the rules of the game changed. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that I'd once bought him for Christmas, back when we exchanged gifts instead of divorce papers. Close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the only external sign of whatever was happening behind that carefully controlled expression. His gaze dropped to my midsection again, lingering there with an intensity that made me want to cover myself despite the dress. "How far along?" "That's none of your—" "How far along?" Each word delivered with surgical precision. the voice he used when giving orders that people died for disobeying. 6 months, I heard myself answer, hating how easily I capitulated to that tone. But the real question was, who planned it? I watched him do the math, saw the moment the timeline crystallized. 6 months pregnant meant conception in late March. We'd signed the divorce papers on March 15th, had one final devastating argument on March 18th that had ended with us in bed together. Grief and rage and goodbye, all tangled into something that felt like violence wearing love's face. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I'd started feeling sick. Is it mine? The question emerged quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more dangerous than if he'd shouted. This was the moment I'd been dreading for 6 months. The confrontation I'd avoided through careful planning and desperate concealment. I could lie, spin some story about moving on, about finding someone else, about the baby belonging to a relationship that didn't involve him. But Jackson knew me too well, knew my tells, my patterns, the micro-expressions I couldn't control. I met someone, I started, forcing conviction into my voice. After the divorce, Your left eye just twitched. He moved closer, invaded my space with that particular aggressive intimacy he'd always used when he knew I was hiding something. It always does when you lie. Has since the first time I caught you pretending to like my mother's cooking. Someone in the room was lying, but who? His hand came up, not threatening, but deliberate, catching my chin and tilting my face toward the harsh fluorescent light, studying me with that clinical focus he applied to business negotiations and threat assessment. So let's try that again. His voice dropped to something dangerously soft, the tone that preceded violence in his world. Is it mine? Let go of me. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened fractionally, not enough to hurt, but enough to demonstrate that I wasn't leaving until he had answers. Harper. My name emerged rough, stripped of the control he usually maintained. I asked you a question, and you're going to answer it, right now, or I swear to God. Or what? Fury flooded through me. Hot and sudden, burning through 6 months of carefully maintained distance. You'll what, Jackson? Threaten me? Use your considerable power to make my life hell? Because you already did that when you threw away our marriage like it meant nothing. That's not... You divorced me. The words exploded out of me, months of suppressed rage finding its target. You looked at those test results and decided I was defective, broken, not worth keeping because I couldn't give you the air you needed for your empire. You didn't even fight for us. Just signed the papers and moved on like our 2 years together were a failed business venture. He trusted her, and that was his biggest mistake. The doctor said, I don't care what the doctor said. My voice cracked, tears threatening despite my determination not to show weakness. You made a choice. You chose your legacy over me. So yes, I met someone else. Someone who wanted me for more than my reproductive capacity. I watched his face as I delivered the lie. Saw something that might have been pain flash across his features before the mask slammed back into place. His hand dropped from my chin, but he didn't step back. Instead, he moved even closer, eliminating the last inches of space between us, his body crowding mine against the corridor wall in a gesture that was pure dominance. Your left eye, he said quietly, just twitched again. His hand slid from my face to my stomach, settling there with shocking gentleness over the curve I'd spent 6 months hiding. The baby kicked immediately, a firm roll against his palm that made his entire body go rigid. What she said next shattered his trust instantly. That's my child, not a question. A statement of absolute certainty, delivered with the same conviction he used when making decisions that shaped empires. My son or daughter, growing inside you. Conceived when, Harper? When exactly did you meet someone else? I couldn't answer. could barely breathe with his hand pressed against my stomach, feeling the baby, our baby, move beneath his palm. March 18th, he continued, his voice dropping to something that sent shivers down my spine. Our last night together. When I showed up at your apartment drunk and furious and you should have slammed the door in my face, but you let me in anyway. When we fucked like we were trying to destroy each other because we didn't know any other way to say goodbye. Stop. The word emerged broken. His other hand came up, framing my face with both palms now, forcing me to meet his eyes. Tell me the truth. Is this baby mine? And I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't maintain the lie while he touched me like this, while our child moved between us, while 6 months of separation dissolved under the weight of his absolute certainty. Yes, I whispered. Yes, damn you. The baby is yours. The confession hung between us like gunpowder waiting for a spark. I watched the impact register on Jackson's face, saw shock and fury, and something that looked almost like grief flash across his features before he locked them down behind that terrifying control. Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. His hands dropped from my face like I'd burned him. He took 2 steps back, then 3. Putting distance between us as if proximity might cause damage neither of us could survive. 6 months. His voice emerged hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. You've known for 6 months that you're carrying my child, and you didn't. He stopped, jaw clenching. You were going to what, Harper? Raise my son or daughter alone? Pretend I didn't exist? You made it very clear I didn't exist to you anymore. The words came out harder than I'd intended, fury breaking through the fear. The moment that doctor said I was infertile, I became a problem to be solved. An obstacle to the legacy. So yes, when I found out I was pregnant, after you'd already walked away, I decided this baby didn't need a father who'd proven he could abandon us over a medical diagnosis. This choice would define the rest of his life. That's not... He stopped. Ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration I recognized from 1,000 arguments. The doctors said it was impossible. Irreversible ovarian failure. Less than 1% chance even with intervention. How is this? His gaze dropped to my stomach again, confusion bleeding through the anger. How did this happen? I don't know. The truth felt like weakness, but I had no other answer. I was sick for 2 weeks before I took a test. Thought it was stress from the divorce, from rebuilding my life. By the time I confirmed it, you'd already made it clear what you thought of me. Through my attorney. The words emerged flat. You found out you were pregnant, and I was negotiating property division through lawyers. You made your choice. I forced steel into my voice even as my hands trembled. You chose your empire over our marriage. Over me. So I chose our baby over you. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, the predator recognizing a challenge to his authority. That's not a choice you get to make unilaterally. That child is half mine. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for family. That child is growing inside my body. My voice rose, 6 months of suppressed rage finally finding its target. I'm the one who's been sick, who's had my body change, who's planning for a future as a single mother because you decided I wasn't worth keeping. I never said, you didn't have to say it. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You said it with every day of silence after the diagnosis, with every night you stayed at the office instead of coming home, with the divorce papers that cited irreconcilable differences, when what you meant was, she's broken and I need someone who works properly. That's not why I... He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. The family needed an heir, Harper. My father spent his entire life building something that required succession, legacy, continuation. I was supposed to... So you threw away a woman who loved you for a uterus that might someday produce the right chromosomes? I laughed, the sound bitter. Congratulations, Jackson. You got exactly what you wanted. An heir. Growing inside the wife you discarded like defective merchandise. He didn't want revenge. He needed it. The silence that followed felt explosive. I watched him process the words, saw the moment they landed with devastating accuracy. I never thought you were defective, he said quietly. I thought we were both trapped in an impossible situation. You wanted children. We'd talked about names, about nursery colors, and I needed an heir for reasons that went beyond wanting to be a father. The family, the business, the expectations. None of that was more important than us. My voice cracked despite my determination to stay strong. Or at least, it shouldn't have been. But you chose the Empire. And now you don't get to walk back into my life and make demands about our baby. Our baby. He latched onto the words with fierce intensity. You just acknowledged it's ours, which means I have rights. You have nothing. The words exploded out of me. You signed away any rights when you filed for divorce. When you decided I wasn't worth fighting for. If people who walk away when things get hard and then demand everything when it's convenient, make your blood boil like they do mine, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's stand together for everyone who's ever been discarded and expected to just accept it. I'm fighting now. His voice dropped to something that sent ice down my spine. The tone that meant he'd made a decision and God help anyone who stood in his way. And here's how this is going to work, Harper. You're going to agree to a paternity test. Non-invasive, completely safe for you and the baby. We'll establish legal paternity. Absolutely not. And then, we're going to have a conversation about custody arrangements, medical decisions, and how we're going to co-parent a child when you clearly hate me, and I'm apparently a monster for making an impossible choice in an impossible situation. His next decision would decide whether he lived or died. I'm not agreeing to anything. I moved toward the door, desperate to escape this conversation before it destroyed what remained of my composure. You don't get to show up after 6 months and demand access to my life. His hand shot out, catching my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop my momentum. That's where you're wrong, because if you don't cooperate, I will make this so much harder than it needs to be. I stared at him, seeing the man I'd married buried somewhere beneath the Mafia boss he'd become. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. His grip tightened fractionally. You can cooperate with the paternity test, agree to supervised visitation while we work out the details, and we can do this civilly. Or I can use every resource at my disposal to insert myself into your life whether you want me there or not. Lawyers who'll tie you up in court for years. Private investigators who'll document every moment of your pregnancy. Enough legal pressure to make your very comfortable life very uncomfortable. You bastard! I'm a father. The words emerged with devastating finality. Or I'm about to be. And I will not stand aside while you raise my child alone because you're angry about choices I made when I thought we had no other options. He released my wrist, but his eyes held me in place more effectively than his grip. So decide, Harper. Do we do this the easy way or the hard way? Because either way, I'm going to be in my child's life. The only question is whether you're going to fight me every step of the way, or if we're going to find a way to make this work. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him to go to hell and walk out of this corridor and disappear into a life that didn't include him. But I'd seen what Jackson Mallory did to people who stood in his way, seen the ruthlessness he applied to problems that needed solving, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I fought him on this, he would deploy every weapon in his considerable arsenal. Fine. The word tasted like defeat. The paternity test. But that's all you get until we know for certain. We already know. His voice held grim satisfaction. But I'll have the proof anyway. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow to arrange the details. For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. He turned to leave, then stopped, looking back at me with something that might have been regret if I believed he was capable of that emotion anymore. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I never stopped loving you, Harper. I just didn't know how to choose you over everything else I was supposed to be. Then he walked away, leaving me alone in the corridor with his ultimatum and the baby that would bind us together whether I wanted it or not. Jackson arrived at my apartment at exactly 8 a.m., because of course he did. Punctuality had always been one of his weapons, appearing precisely when expected, demonstrating control over time itself in a way that unsettled people who operated on more flexible schedules. I'd spent the previous night alternating between rage and terror, finally giving up on sleep around 5 a.m. and settling for aggressive cleaning of my already spotless kitchen. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom in Brooklyn Heights that ate most of my architectural firm's salary, but provided the distance from Manhattan I desperately needed. 300 square feet of hardwood floors and exposed brick that I'd decorated with deliberate care, creating a space that was entirely mine and contained no trace of the life I'd left behind. Now Jackson Mallory stood in my doorway, making the carefully curated space feel cramped and inadequate, accompanied by a woman in a tailored suit who radiated the particular competence of expensive legal counsel. He knew something that no one else in the building did. Harper Chen? The woman extended her hand with professional efficiency. I'm Victoria Reeves, Mr. Mallory's attorney. We spoke on the phone yesterday regarding the paternity testing. I'd received the call at 9 a.m. sharp, less than 12 hours after the confrontation at the gala. Victoria had been polite, thorough, and absolutely inflexible about the timeline. The test would happen today. A medical professional would be present. Everything would be documented with meticulous precision. May we come in? Victoria's tone suggested refusal wasn't actually an option. I stepped back, letting them into the space I'd defended so carefully. Jackson's gaze swept the apartment with that assessing focus he applied to everything, noting the architectural renderings on the walls, the small dining table I'd refinished myself, the carefully organized bookshelves that held everything from Vitruvius to contemporary sustainable design theory. His attention stopped on the spare bedroom door, currently closed but clearly labeled by the IKEA boxes stacked beside it. Crib parts, changing table components. The beginnings of a nursery I'd been too afraid to fully assemble, as if keeping it in boxes might somehow protect me from the reality of single motherhood. The medical technician is waiting in the car, Victoria said, pulling my attention back. If you're ready, we can proceed with the sample collection. As discussed, this is a non-invasive prenatal paternity test, just a simple blood draw from you, saliva swab from Mr. Mallory. The laboratory will analyze cell-free fetal DNA from your bloodstream and compare it to his genetic markers. I know how it works. I'd researched obsessively after agreeing to this, needing to understand exactly what I was consenting to. The results take 7 to 10 business days. We've arranged for expedited processing, 72 hours. Victoria's smile was professionally pleasant and entirely empty of warmth. Mr. Mallory is willing to cover all associated costs. How generous. The sarcasm slipped out before I could stop it. Jackson's gaze finally left the nursery boxes and settled on me. Can we have a moment, privately? Something didn't add up, and the truth was darker than he expected. Victoria glanced between us, clearly calculating whether leaving her client alone with me constituted professional negligence. Whatever she saw in Jackson's expression made the decision for her. I'll bring up the technician. Take your time. She left with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to managing difficult clients and impossible situations. The door clicked shut, and suddenly the apartment felt even smaller. Just me and Jackson and 6 months of unresolved fury occupying the same 300 square feet. You're buying nursery furniture, he said, gesturing toward the boxes. The baby needs somewhere to sleep. I kept my voice neutral, refusing to acknowledge the vulnerability of those unopened boxes, the fear they represented. Have you assembled any of it? Not yet. Why not? Because assembling it would make it real. Because as long as the crib stayed in boxes, I could pretend this was all temporary, reversible, something that might disappear if I refused to acknowledge it fully. Because I was terrified of doing this alone. I've been busy, I said instead. Work doesn't stop just because I'm pregnant. He moved closer, careful not to crowd me but eliminating enough distance to make his presence unavoidable. I could help, with the furniture, with... He stopped, jaw tightening. I know you don't want me here, Harper. I know you think I gave up on us, that I chose wrong. Maybe I did, but this baby, our baby, deserves better than parents who can barely stand to be in the same room. So what are you suggesting? We pretend the divorce never happened? Play house for the sake of the child? I'm suggesting we find a way to coexist that doesn't poison our kid before they're even born. His voice was rough with something that might have been genuine emotion. I'm suggesting that maybe, possibly, we could try to... A knock at the door interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Victoria returned with a woman in medical scrubs carrying a professional-looking kit, her smile practiced and reassuring. Ms. Chen? I'm Rachel Torres, certified phlebotomist. This will just take a few minutes. The blood draw was quick and professional. Rachel made small talk about the weather while she worked, carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of the obviously fraught situation she'd walked into. Jackson provided his saliva sample with the same clinical efficiency he applied to business transactions. Swab, seal, label, done. Results will be sent to Ms. Reeves's office, Rachel confirmed as she packed up her kit. Congratulations to both of you on the pregnancy. But this wasn't even the most shocking part. The statement hung awkwardly in the air as she left, Victoria following with promises to be in touch the moment the results arrived. Then it was just us again. Jackson and me and the baby that had already been confirmed by biology, but needed legal verification to satisfy the requirements of his world. I should go, he said, but didn't move toward the door. Unless, do you need anything? Are you eating properly? Taking vitamins? I could have my doctor. I have a doctor. The words came out harsher than intended. I've been managing this pregnancy just fine without you. I know. Something that looked like pain crossed his features. I know you have, but you shouldn't have to manage it alone anymore. He moved toward me then, slowly, giving me time to retreat if I wanted. When I didn't, he stopped close enough to touch, his hand hovering over my stomach before settling there with devastating gentleness. The baby kicked immediately, a firm roll against his palm. I watched Jackson's entire expression transform, shock and wonder and something fierce that I recognized from when we'd first talked about having children, back when our future had felt infinite and uncomplicated. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. That's my child you're carrying, Harper. His voice emerged rough, stripped of the control he usually maintained. My son or daughter, you think I'm going to stand aside now that I know? Think I'm going to let you do this alone because it's easier or safer, or because you're still angry about the divorce? Jackson, I'm going to be there. His other hand came up to frame my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. For every appointment, every milestone, every 3 a.m. feeding and diaper change and first word, I'm going to be the father this child deserves, even if you never forgive me for being a terrible husband. You can't just watch me. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. 72 hours, Harper. Then we'll have legal proof of what we both already know. And then we're going to figure out how to do this together, whether you like it or not. His thumb brushed across my cheek, catching a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. Then he stepped back, letting his hands drop, already moving toward the door. I meant what I said last night, he added, pausing at the threshold. I never stopped loving you, and I'm not going to lose you. Lose both of you. Because I was too much of a coward to fight for what matters. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with his promises and the baby that would bind us together far more effectively than wedding vows ever had. The paternity results arrived exactly 72 hours later, delivered by Victoria Reeves in person rather than through the impersonal efficiency of email or courier service. She sat in my apartment's small living room, her expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested she'd delivered difficult news often enough to have perfected the mask. The results are conclusive, she said, sliding a folder across my coffee table. Mr. Mallory is the biological father. 99.9% probability, which is as definitive as genetic testing gets. I didn't open the folder. Didn't need to see the scientific confirmation of what I'd known since the moment that second line had appeared on the pregnancy test. I assume you've already informed him. He received his copy an hour ago. Victoria's professional composure slipped slightly. He asked me to arrange a meeting. Tonight, if you're willing. He has information about your original diagnosis that he believes you need to hear. What kind of information? He didn't share the details with me. She stood, smoothing her suit jacket with practiced efficiency. But he was unusually agitated when he called. Whatever he's discovered, it's significant. Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. Jackson arrived at 7 p.m. carrying takeout from the Thai restaurant we'd frequented during our marriage. Pad see ew for him, panang curry for me. Always extra spicy because I'd never developed a typical pregnancy aversion to heat. The familiar green and white bags felt like an olive branch, or possibly a weapon disguised as one. You remembered, I said, accepting the food despite my determination to maintain distance. I remember everything about you, Harper. He set the bags on the counter, his movements tense with barely controlled energy. That's part of the problem. We ate in silence that felt less hostile than exhausted, two people too tired to maintain the fury that had sustained us through the past few days. The curry was perfect, exactly as I remembered, and I hated how much comfort that familiar taste provided. Jackson waited until I'd finished eating before speaking. I had my people investigate Dr. Royce, the doctor who diagnosed you with irreversible ovarian failure. Why? The question emerged sharper than intended. Because you're sitting across from me 6 months pregnant with a child we were told was medically impossible. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to something, then slid it across the table. Because something about that diagnosis never sat right, but I was too wrapped up in grief to question it properly. What she found in the envelope froze her in place. The image on screen showed a bank statement. Dr. Leonard Royce's personal account. The relevant transaction highlighted in yellow. A deposit of $250,000 dated 2 days after our appointment. The transfer origin was listed as Alston Medical Holdings. The Alston family, I said, at all. Recognition hitting like ice water. Your father's rivals. Not rivals. Enemies. Jackson's voice was flat, drained of emotion in that way that meant he was barely containing rage. The family that's been trying to undermine Mallory interests for 3 generations. The family that would benefit enormously from me dying without a legitimate heir. You think they paid Dr. Royce to lie to us? I know they did. He pulled up another image. Email correspondence between Royce and someone named Marcus Alston. The messages were coded but clear enough. The diagnosis was delivered as requested. Patient extremely distressed. Recommended terminating all fertility treatment. My hands started shaking, the phone nearly slipping from my grip. He lied. The whole diagnosis, the tests, the prognosis, everything. It was fabricated? But there was one thing he didn't know about his closest ally. Not entirely. Jackson took the phone back before I could drop it. You did have some minor hormonal irregularities. Nothing that would prevent conception, but enough to build a convincing false diagnosis around. Royce took legitimate test results and manipulated the interpretation to make you believe you were infertile. Why? The word emerged broken. Why would they? Because they've been waiting for my father to die for 20 years, waiting for succession to create vulnerability they could exploit. His jaw clenched. Vincent Mallory's death a year before our divorce was the opening they needed. I was still consolidating power, still proving I could lead. If they could prevent me from producing an heir, they could position themselves to claim territory when I eventually died. Make it look like the Mallory line had ended naturally. So they destroyed our marriage. I stood, needing to move, to process information that was rewriting my entire understanding of the past year. They paid a doctor to lie to us, knowing it would drive us apart. Knowing it would prevent us from having children. Jackson stood too, following me across the small space. They couldn't kill you. That would be too obvious, would violate codes that even families like ours follow. But they could make you believe you were infertile. Make me believe it. Let our marriage collapse under the weight of that manufactured grief. And suddenly, he realized he was being played. And you believed it. I turned on him, fury finding its target. You didn't question the diagnosis, didn't seek a second opinion, just accepted that I was broken and filed for divorce. Because my father had just died and I was barely holding the family together and I thought... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I thought we were both suffering from something neither of us could fix. I thought letting you go was the kindest thing I could do instead of trapping you in a marriage that would never give you the children you wanted. So you made the decision for both of us. Yes. The admission came quietly. I did. And it was the worst mistake of my life. He pulled out his phone again, showing me more evidence, financial records, email threads, testimony from a source he'd clearly pressured into cooperation. The documentation was overwhelming, painting a picture of calculated cruelty designed to exploit his greatest vulnerability. The Alston family engineered our divorce, Jackson continued. They paid Royce $250,000 to deliver a false diagnosis, knowing you wanted children badly enough that infertility would devastate you. Knowing I needed an heir badly enough that your inability to provide one would drive a wedge between us they could exploit. Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. Why are you telling me this now? I wrapped my arms around my stomach protectively, feeling the baby move beneath my hands. Why not just... Because you're carrying proof that their plan failed. His gaze dropped to where my hands rested over the bump. Because that baby represents everything they tried to prevent. A legitimate Mallory heir, conceived naturally, destroying their entire strategy. They'll come after us. The realization hit with sickening certainty. If this baby threatens their plans, they're already moving. Jackson's expression went hard, the Mafia boss replacing the regretful ex-husband. I've intercepted communications suggesting they know about the pregnancy, which means you're not safe in this apartment anymore. You're not safe anywhere I can't protect you. So what are you suggesting? I have a penthouse in Tribeca, 42nd floor, building security that makes Fort Knox look accessible. Panic room with independent life support, my people stationed on every entrance. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something urgent. Move in with me. Let me keep you and our baby safe while I handle the Alstons. Handle them how? However I have to. His jaw clenched. They violated codes that even we follow. They targeted my wife, ex-wife, and orchestrated fraud that affected family succession. That's enough justification to bring this to the council, to demand they answer for crimes that affect all of us. But he had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. The council? The 5 families that run organized crime in this city. We have rules, Harper. Lines we don't cross even when we're at war with each other. The Alstons crossed several of them when they manipulated your medical care. His hand came up to cut my face with devastating gentleness. Let me fix this. Let me protect you while I make sure they never threaten our family again. I wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the independence I'd fought so hard to establish. But looking at the evidence he'd compiled, understanding the scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed our marriage, I knew I couldn't do this alone. "Okay," I whispered. "But this doesn't mean I've forgiven you. Doesn't mean we're—" "I know." He pulled me against him carefully, mindful of my stomach, his arms coming around me with fierce protectiveness. "We'll figure out what we are later. Right now, let me just keep you both safe." The Tribeca penthouse was exactly what I'd expected from Jackson Mallory. 4,200 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows, custom everything, and enough security infrastructure to guard a head of state. The panic room he'd mentioned was hidden behind what looked like a bookshelf in the master suite, complete with independent air supply, reinforced walls, and enough provisions to survive a siege. "Your room," Jackson said, showing me to a guest bedroom that was larger than my entire Brooklyn apartment. "The bathroom has a soaking tub. I know your back must be killing you at 6 months. Fresh towels in the cabinet, and I had someone stock basic toiletries. But if you need anything specific..." "This is fine." I set down the single suitcase I'd packed, feeling overwhelmed by the transition from my carefully controlled independence to this gilded cage, however comfortable. "Thank you." He lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say more but holding back. "I'm just down the hall if you need anything. Security has instructions to let you come and go as needed, but I'd appreciate if you'd let someone know when you're leaving, just in case." But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The first week passed in careful orbit around each other, Jackson leaving early for whatever business required his attention, returning late enough that I was usually already in bed. We communicated through notes left on the kitchen counter, through text messages that were cordial and empty of substance. Then, on the 8th night, I emerged from my room at 11 p.m. craving the mango sticky rice I'd been obsessing over all day, only to find Jackson in the kitchen wearing sweatpants and an old Columbia t-shirt I remembered from our marriage, his hands covered in flour. "You're baking," I said, surprised enough to forget our careful distance. He looked up, caught, his expression almost sheepish. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd..." He gestured at the counter, where cookie dough sat in various stages of preparation. "You used to love these. The chocolate chip ones with sea salt. My grandmother's recipe, the one I'd taught him during our first year of marriage, back when we'd spent Sunday mornings in our tiny apartment kitchen, him following my instructions with endearing precision. I haven't had these since..." I stopped, the timeline too painful to complete. "Since the divorce. I know." He wiped his hands on a towel, looking younger somehow without the suits and the authority they provided. "I'm sorry. I can make something else if you'd rather." "No." I moved into the kitchen, drawn by the familiar smell of vanilla and brown sugar. "I want them. The baby wants them. We've been craving sweets all week." Something in his expressions softened. "The baby wants cookies? Is that how that works?" "That's exactly how it works." I pulled out a stool at the kitchen island, settling onto it with the careful maneuvering 6 months of pregnancy required. "The baby has very specific opinions about food. Last week it was Thai curry. This week it's anything with chocolate." He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. "What about morning sickness? Are you still..." "That ended around month 4, thank God. Now it's just constant hunger and bizarre cravings." I watched him portion dough onto a baking sheet with the same meticulous precision he applied to everything. "You remembered the sea salt. I remember everything about you." The words echoed what he'd said before, but this time they emerged softer, almost vulnerable, including that you like these cookies slightly underbaked, edges crisp, but centers still soft. We fell into familiar rhythm, him baking, me stealing bits of dough when he wasn't looking, both of us pretending the past year of separation had been a bad dream instead of brutal reality. The cookies emerged perfect, and we ate them warm at the kitchen island while rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I started assembling the nursery, Jackson said quietly. The furniture you had in boxes. Put it in the room next to yours. I should have asked first. You assembled it? I tried to picture him with an Allen wrench and IKEA instructions. Had help from Marcus, my head of security. Took us 3 hours and several arguments about whether the instructions were in Swedish or some kind of code. He smiled, the expression transforming his face into something closer to the man I'd married. But it's done. Crib, changing table, dresser. Still needs decorating, but the bones are there. Can I see it? He led me down the hallway, past his bedroom and mine, to a door I hadn't opened since moving in. The room beyond was perfect. Painted a soft gray I remembered discussing during our marriage. The furniture arranged with obvious care. Everything ready for a baby that would arrive in 3 months. What followed next was completely unexpected. I thought maybe we could go shopping, Jackson continued, watching my face carefully. For the decorations, the bedding, all the things I have no idea about. If you wanted, together. Together, I repeated, testing the word. I know you're still angry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness for everything. His voice was rough. But this baby deserves parents who can at least be in the same room without destroying each other. So maybe we could try? To be something other than enemies? I looked at the nursery he'd assembled, at the care evident in every corner, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of willingness to try. Okay, I said quietly. We can try. Over the following weeks, we built routines that felt almost domestic. Jackson started coming home earlier, joining me for dinners he insisted on cooking despite my protests that I was capable of feeding myself. We fell into evening patterns, him working in his study while I sketched nursery ideas, both of us migrating to the living room around 9 to watch terrible reality TV that he pretended to hate, but clearly enjoyed. Are you Team Jackson and Harper? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This story is just getting started. He came to my doctor's appointment, sitting beside me while the ultrasound technician showed us our daughter, because we were having a girl, the revelation making Jackson's entire expression transform into something odd and terrified. A daughter, he'd whispered, staring at the grainy image. We're having a daughter. He painted the nursery walls himself, covering the gray with clouds and stars I'd sketched. His execution meticulous despite never having held a paintbrush for artistic purposes. We shopped for baby clothes together, Jackson developing strong opinions about which onesies were structurally superior, and which blankets provided optimal warmth without overheating risk. I watched him become a father before our daughter was even born. Saw the fierce protectiveness that had once been directed at me now focused on the baby growing between us. Saw glimpses of the man I'd married, the one who'd brought me coffee in bed and learned to bake my grandmother's recipes and stayed up all night when I was sick with the flu. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. I know this doesn't fix what I broke, he said one night, 3 weeks into our uncomfortable peace. We were assembling the crib mobile. Stars and moons he'd insisted on buying despite my protests that the baby wouldn't care. I know moving in here, doing the domestic thing, none of it erases the divorce, or the months you spent alone, or… Jackson. I caught his hand, stopping the spiral I could feel building. I'm not ready to talk about us yet. About what we were, or might be. But I'm willing to let you be present in our daughter's life. And maybe over time we'll figure out what that means for everything else. Over time, he repeated, hope flickering across his features before he locked it down. I can work with that. He raised my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles with devastating gentleness. Thank you. For giving me this chance. For letting me try to be the father she deserves, even if I was a terrible husband. You weren't terrible, I admitted quietly. Just human. We both were. And maybe if we'd had more time, if the Alstons hadn't… They'll pay for what they did to us." His voice hardened, the Mafia boss emerging through the domestic facade. "I promise you that, Harper. They'll answer for the marriage they destroyed and the family they tried to prevent." But for that moment, in the nursery he'd assembled with his own hands, preparing for the daughter neither of us had thought possible. The future felt almost manageable, almost safe. We should have known better. The explosion came at 3 a.m., shattering our fragile peace with the efficiency of military-grade ordnance. One moment I was dreaming about painting clouds on nursery walls. The next, Jackson was pulling me from bed, his body covering mine as the reinforced windows on the western side of the penthouse blew inward in a spray of safety glass. He had no idea the night would end in blood. "Stay low." His voice was battlefield calm despite the chaos, one hand protecting my stomach while the other reached for the gun I'd never seen him keep in the nightstand. "Head for the panic room, now!" But the hallway was already compromised. I could hear gunfire, shouting, the efficient violence of a coordinated assault. Jackson's security team was engaging the threat, but whoever had planned this had planned it well. "The Alstons," I managed through the terror. "This is..." "Yes." He pulled me toward his bedroom instead, toward the panic room hidden behind the bookshelf. "And they're not leaving until they get what they came for." He never got to finish activating the panic room door. 3 men rounded the corner, weapons raised, faces covered. Professional killers, I realized with sickening clarity. Not street thugs or opportunistic criminals, but trained operatives executing a precision strike. Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. Jackson moved before they could fire, positioned his body between them and me, his weapon coming up with practiced fluidity. The shots he fired were precise, controlled, center mass, double tap, exactly as he'd been trained by whatever dark education had prepared him for this life. 2 of the attackers went down. The third got a shot off that caught Jackson high on the left shoulder, spinning him partially around. But he didn't fall, didn't even cry out. Just adjusted his stance and put another round through the shooter's throat with terrifying accuracy. "Jackson!" I was moving toward him before conscious thought engaged, hands already reaching for the wound that was bleeding through his t-shirt. "I'm fine." He caught my hands, preventing me from touching the injury. "Stay behind me. This isn't over." He was right. I could hear more movement on the floors below, more shouting, the organized chaos of a building under siege. How many had they sent? How thoroughly had they planned this assault? Jackson's security team appeared, led by Marcus, the man who'd helped assemble nursery furniture, now wielding an assault rifle with practiced ease. The stairwells are compromised. They came up through the parking garage, disabled the cameras, took out 3 of our people before we even knew they were here. How many? At least a dozen. All professional. Marcus's gaze flicked to me, to Jackson's bleeding shoulder. "We need to get you both to the panic room, now." His right-hand man had been hiding something from him. The bookshelf was already sliding open, revealing the reinforced space beyond. Jackson pushed me toward it, his movements sharp despite the injury. "Both of us," I said, catching his arm. "You're coming too." "I'm ending this." His voice carried absolute finality. "They violated my home, Harper. Threatened my daughter. That requires a response that's personal, not strategic. You're bleeding. I've survived worse." He cupped my face with his uninjured hand, his touch gentle despite the violence surrounding us. "Please, get in the panic room. Lock it down. Let me handle this without worrying that you're in the line of fire." "Sir." Marcus's voice was urgent. "They're regrouping. If we're going to move, it has to be now." Jackson kissed me, fierce and desperate and tasting like goodbye. Then he physically lifted me and placed me in the panic room, his eyes holding mine for one suspended moment before he slammed the door between us. He should have walked away, but then he saw it. I heard the locks engage, felt the air pressure shift as the independent systems activated. Through the door's small reinforced window, I watched Jackson and Marcus disappear down the hallway, moving toward the threat with the calm efficiency of men trained for this exact scenario. The panic room had monitors showing security feeds throughout the building. I watched the battle unfold with helpless terror. Jackson moving through his home with brutal precision. Each shot fired a statement of absolute dominance. He was bleeding, favoring his injured shoulder, but the pain only seemed to make him more dangerous. This was the man the city's underworld feared, not the domestic version who'd assembled cribs and baked cookies, but the Mafia boss who'd inherited an empire and defended it through calculated violence. Watching him work was terrifying and magnificent in equal measure. The assault team had expected resistance. What they hadn't expected was Jackson Mallory defending his family with the fury of someone who'd already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. He was methodical, ruthless, eliminating threats with the kind of surgical precision that spoke to years of training and natural aptitude for violence. When it was over, when the last attacker was down and Marcus was calling for cleanup crews, Jackson collapsed against the hallway wall, his shoulders still bleeding, his face pale from blood loss. I was out of the panic room before Marcus could stop me, my hands already on Jackson before he could protest. "Hospital," I said, voice brooking no argument. "Right now." "It's just a flesh wound." "You were shot defending me and our daughter." The words came out harder than intended, fear transmuting to fury. "You're going to the hospital, getting that treated properly, and then you're going to rest while I figure out how the hell to process what just happened." His uninjured arm came around me, pulling me against him despite the blood and the chaos. "I told you I'd protect you both. Whatever it takes. Even if that means—" "I know." I pressed my face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady despite everything. "I know. And you did. You saved us." "Always," he whispered into my hair. "I'll always save you. Both of you. No matter what it costs." The bullet had gone through clean. Painful, but not permanently damaging. The hospital patched him up with the discretion money could buy, asking no questions about the obvious gunfight wounds. By the time we returned to the penthouse, now crawling with additional security and being swept for any compromises the assault might have created, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. "They'll come again," I said quietly, watching the sunrise from the living room. "The Alstons. This won't be the end." "No." Jackson's voice was grim, his injured arm in a sling, but his resolve clearly intact. "But it's the beginning of the end for them. They violated codes that even families like ours follow. They attacked a pregnant woman. That's enough to bring them before the council and demand justice." "The council?" "The 5 families that run this city. We have rules, Harper. Lines we don't cross. The Alstons just crossed all of them." His good hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Let me end this. Permanently. So our daughter can be born into a world where the Alston threat is just history." I looked at him, injured, exhausted, still ready to go to war for us, and made my decision. "End it," I said. "Do whatever you have to do. Just make sure she's safe." His smile was fierce and terrible. "Consider it done." The council convened 3 days after the assault, summoned by Jackson through channels I didn't fully understand, but that apparently carried the weight of sacred law in his world. The meeting was held in neutral territory, a private room at an exclusive club in Midtown, the kind of place where Manhattan's elite conducted business that ranged from merely unethical to actively criminal. I wasn't supposed to attend. Jackson had been clear that council meetings were family business only, that bringing me would violate protocols he needed to follow if this confrontation was going to achieve the results he wanted. But I'd insisted. This wasn't just about mafia politics or territorial disputes. This was about the medical fraud that had destroyed our marriage, the attack that had threatened our daughter. I had as much right to see the Alstons answer for their crimes as Jackson did. So I sat in the corner of the room, 6 months pregnant and visibly so, while the 5 families that controlled organized crime in New York City gathered around an antique conference table. Jackson sat at the head, his injured shoulder concealed beneath a perfectly tailored suit, his expression giving nothing away. To his right was Marco Castellani, representing the family that controlled the ports. To his left, Victoria Genovese, whose family ran the construction unions. Across from them sat Thomas O'Brien and David Chen, the Irish and Chinese family representatives respectively. And at the far end of the table, looking considerably less confident than they had 3 days ago, sat Marcus and Catherine Alston. He thought it was over, until he noticed something strange. This council was convened to address violations of our established codes, Jackson began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority despite his injury. Specifically, violations committed by the Alston family against my household and family interests. We've committed no violations, Marcus started, but Jackson's raised hand cut him off with the efficiency of a blade. You orchestrated medical fraud designed to prevent me from producing an heir. Jackson's voice was dangerously soft. You paid Dr. Leonard Royce $250,000 to deliver a false infertility diagnosis to my then-wife, knowing the information would destroy our marriage and prevent the Mallory succession you've been trying to undermine for 3 generations. He slid documents across the table. The same evidence he'd shown me, now compiled into a presentation that was methodical and devastating. Bank records, email correspondence, testimony from Royce himself, who'd apparently been very cooperative once Jackson's people had applied appropriate pressure. The diagnosis was legitimate. Catherine tried, but her voice lacked conviction. The diagnosis was fraud, Marco Castellani interjected, his accented English carrying weight that came from decades of authority. I've had my own medical experts review the documentation. The test results were manipulated. The prognosis was fabricated. This constitutes interference with family succession, which violates Council Code 3. His next words hit him harder than any bullet. Furthermore, Jackson continued, his gaze locked on the Alstons with predatory focus. 3 days ago, the Alston family orchestrated a direct assault on my residence. 12 armed operatives, military-grade explosives, a coordinated attack designed to eliminate both myself and my ex-wife. He gestured toward me, making my presence and condition impossible to ignore. Who is currently 6 months pregnant with my daughter. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. I watched the other council members' expressions shift from professional interest to genuine shock and rage. You attacked a pregnant woman? Victoria Genovese's voice was ice. You violated sanctuary laws? We had nothing to do with that assault, Marcus protested, but I could see the calculation in his eyes, the recognition that this defense was failing. If operatives moved against the Mallory household, they did so without our authorization. The strike team was funded through Alston Medical Holdings. Thomas O'Brien cut in, consulting his own documentation. The same account used to pay Royce. The paper trail is clear. You ordered this assault. In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. They targeted my daughter. Jackson's voice dropped to something that made the hair on my arms stand up. A child who hasn't even been born yet. A child whose existence proves that your entire strategy of preventing Mallory's succession through manufactured infertility was a failure. He stood, moving around the table with controlled menace despite his injury. You violated Code 3 by interfering with family succession. You violated Code 7 by attacking a pregnant woman. You violated Code 12 by conducting military operations in protected residential zones. He stopped directly in front of the Alstons, looking down at them with the kind of controlled fury that preceded violence. By the powers invested in this council, I'm calling for censure and removal of the Alston family from all territory and operations within the 5 boroughs. Effective immediately. You can't, Catherine started. He can, David Chen interrupted. The codes are clear. Medical fraud affecting succession is grounds for censure. Military assault on a pregnant woman is grounds for removal. Combined, they constitute violations serious enough to warrant complete territorial forfeiture. All in favor? Marco Castellani's voice was formal, ritual. 4 hands rose. Everyone except the Alstons themselves. The motion carries, Jackson said, his voice carrying absolute finality. The Alston family is hereby removed from council authority. All territory, all operations, all protections afforded by membership are revoked. You have 72 hours to liquidate your interests and leave the city. After that, you're fair game for anyone who has grievances. This is illegal. Marcus tried one last protest. This is justice. Jackson's voice was steel. You wanted to destroy my family line. Instead, you've destroyed your own. Now get out of my sight before I decide that removal from the council isn't sufficient consequence for threatening my daughter. The Alstons left under escort, their faces pale with the recognition of how completely they'd miscalculated. The other council members dispersed with professional efficiency, offering Jackson congratulations on his daughter and promises of support if the Alstons violated the terms of their removal. Then it was just us, Jackson and me and the baby that had been the catalyst for all of this, sitting in the empty conference room while Manhattan continued its oblivious dance beyond the windows. It's over, he said quietly, sinking into a chair with exhaustion that suggested his injury was bothering him more than he'd let on. They're gone. They can't threaten you anymore. Can't hurt our daughter. It's finally over. I moved to him, letting him pull me carefully onto his lap. Awkward with my pregnant belly, but comforting in ways I hadn't let myself acknowledge. You could have had them killed. I considered it. His hands settled on my stomach, feeling our daughter move beneath his palm. But that would make me as bad as them. This way, they lose everything that matters: power, territory, respect, and they have to live with knowing they destroyed themselves trying to destroy us. What happens now? Now, he pressed a kiss to my temple, his voice softening. Now we wait for our daughter to be born. We figure out how to be parents. And maybe, if you're willing, we try to figure out how to be us again. I turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. I'm not ready to. I know. He cupped my face gently. I'm not asking for promises. Just possibility. The chance to prove I can choose you over the empire, our family over everything else. Can you give me that? I thought about the past 3 months. The cookies baked at midnight, the nursery assembled with careful hands, the way he'd thrown himself between me and armed operatives without hesitation. Yeah, I whispered. I can give you that. His kiss was gentle, reverent, tasting like hope and second chances and the future we'd almost lost. Outside, Manhattan gleamed in the afternoon sun, full of dangers we'd survived, and possibilities we were just beginning to explore. Our daughter arrived 3 weeks early, in the middle of a snowstorm that turned Manhattan into something from a fairy tale. The contractions started at 2 a.m., and by dawn we were at the hospital. Jackson's hand gripping mine through every wave of pain that seemed impossible to survive until the next one proved me wrong. You're doing amazing, he kept saying, his voice rough with emotion I'd never heard before. So strong, so brave. Just a little longer, Harper. Just a little longer. The labor was long. 18 hours that blurred into an endless cycle of pain and pressure and Jackson's steady presence, his hand in mine, his voice in my ear telling me I could do this, that our daughter was almost here, that he loved me. He'd said it so easily, that declaration I'd been waiting months to hear. I love you, not weighted with expectation or conditions, just simple truth delivered between contractions while I squeezed his hand hard enough to bruise. When Sophia Mallory finally arrived, 6 pounds, 8 ounces of fury and perfection, Jackson cried. Actually cried, tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed our daughter in his arms, his expression transforming into something I'd never seen before. She's perfect, he whispered, his voice breaking. Harper, look at her. She's absolutely perfect. I looked at my daughter, our daughter, and felt something fundamental shift in my chest. This tiny person who'd survived medical fraud and assassination attempts, and her parents' complicated history. This miracle who shouldn't exist but did, fierce and alive and ours. She has your eyes, I said, watching Sophia's dark gaze trying to focus on her father's face. She has your stubbornness. Jackson's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. I can already tell. This is going to be trouble. He brought Sophia to me, settling her in my arms with exquisite care, then climbed into the hospital bed beside us. Completely inappropriate and absolutely necessary. His good arm came around me, creating a circle of warmth that held our entire world. I love you, he said again, this time looking at both of us. I loved you before, but I didn't know how to choose you over everything else I thought I was supposed to be. But this, he gestured to Sophia, to me, to the family we'd created through medical fraud and violence and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. This is what matters. Not the empire, not the legacy, not anything except the two of you. Jackson, I know you're not ready to remarry me. I know I haven't earned that trust back yet. His voice was firm despite the emotion. But I'm asking for the chance to try. To prove I can be the partner you deserved from the beginning. The father Sophia deserves. The man who chooses you both over everything else. Every single time. I looked at him. Injured shoulder, expensive suit wrinkled from 18 hours in a hospital chair, eyes red from crying over our daughter, and saw not the Mafia boss who'd let me go, but the man who'd fought his way back. I married you once before, I said quietly. Maybe we could try it again. Differently this time. Better. Better, he agreed, his voice rough with hope. I can do better. I promise you that, Harper. I'll spend the rest of my life being better, if you'll let me. Sophia made a small noise, not quite a cry, just a statement of her existence, and we both looked down at her, marveling at the impossibility of her presence. She's ours, I whispered, still amazed by that truth. She's ours, Jackson confirmed. And she's going to grow up knowing she's loved, protected, wanted. Everything we can give her, Harper. Everything we didn't have ourselves. Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall over Manhattan, covering the city in white silence. Somewhere out there, the Alston family was packing up their remaining interests, preparing to leave the territory they'd lost. Somewhere out there, the empire Jackson had inherited continued operating, business proceeding whether we were present or not. But in this room, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was Sophia sleeping between us. What mattered was Jackson's promise to choose us over everything else. What mattered was the family we'd built from the ashes of the one they'd tried to destroy. I do love you, I said, finally letting myself admit it. I never stopped, even when I hated you. Even when I thought you'd chosen wrong. I loved you through all of it. I know. He pressed a kiss to my temple, careful not to disturb our sleeping daughter. And I'm going to spend the rest of our lives proving I'm worth that love. That you didn't make a mistake giving me this second chance. Third chance, technically, I pointed out. First marriage, the divorce, now this. Then I'll make sure the third time is permanent. His voice carried absolute conviction. No more mistakes, no more choosing wrong. Just us, Sophia, and whatever future we build together. Sophia stirred, her tiny hand curling around Jackson's finger with surprising strength. He stared at that small grip like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held. She's perfect, he said again, wonder still evident in every word. We made something perfect, Harper. Despite everything, the fraud, the violence, the separation. We made her. We made a family, I corrected softly. That's what she is. Not just a baby, but proof that we can survive anything. That love can survive anything if you fight hard enough for it. Then I'm never stopping fighting, Jackson promised. For you, for Sophia, for this family we're building from broken pieces and second chances. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, our daughter slept. And somewhere between the past we'd survived and the future we were choosing, Jackson and Harper Mallory began again. This time, they got it right. If you felt something while watching, please subscribe. That's how I know these stories mean something to you, even on your TV. Take a second to join our community of story lovers. Your support keeps this world of emotions alive.